Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Sophia, and I'm here with James. Today, we're going to talk about something really important: how to master English conversations. Whether you're just starting or you've been learning for a while, this podcast will help you speak English better and feel more confident when talking to people.
Hi, everyone. Yes, mastering conversations is key to speaking English fluently. Think about the times when you've tried to have a conversation in English. Did you ever feel nervous or unsure of what to say next? Well, today, we're going to help you overcome that.
One of the first things to remember about conversations is that they're not just about the words you say. They're about listening to. When you have a conversation, it's important to listen carefully to what the other person is saying. This will help you respond correctly and keep the conversation going.
Exactly. Listening is so important. A good way to practice listening is by watching English videos, like movies or TV shows, and trying to follow the conversations. But don't just listen passively. Pay attention to how the people in the conversation take turns speaking. Notice how they ask questions and how they answer them.
That's a great point. And speaking of questions, asking questions is a really good way to keep a conversation going. For example, if someone asks you, "How are you today?" you can answer, "I'm doing well, thanks, and how are you?" You see, by asking the question back, you keep the conversation moving.
Yes, it's like playing tennis. You hit the ball to the other person, and they hit it back. In conversations, you speak, they listen, then they speak, and you listen. It's a two-way street.
That's a fun way to look at it. Another important tip is to use simple and short sentences. Don't worry about trying to use big or complicated words. It's better to keep it simple so you can focus on what you're trying to say. For example, if you want to ask about someone's day, you could say, "What did you do today?" instead of, "Can you describe the events of your day in detail?"
Right, simple is better, especially when you're still learning. And another thing that can help is learning common phrases. There are certain expressions that native English speakers use all the time, things like "How's it going?" "What's up?" or "That sounds great." Learning these will help you feel more natural when you speak.
Yes, learning useful phrases can make your conversation smoother. And don't forget about body language. In a conversation, it's not just about talking with your mouth, you also speak with your body. For example, smiling shows you're friendly and interested, nodding shows you're listening, and making eye contact makes the conversation feel more personal.
That's a good point. Even if you're not speaking, your body can still communicate a lot. Now, let's talk about mistakes, because they're going to happen. No one speaks perfectly all the time, and that's okay. If you make a mistake, don't panic. Just correct yourself and keep going. The important thing is that you're trying.
Absolutely. Everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. So don't feel embarrassed if you say something wrong. The more you practice, the better you'll get. And here's another thing: try to think in English. If you can start thinking in English instead of translating everything in your head, your conversations will become faster and more natural.
Yes, thinking in English can make a big difference. It takes time, but it's worth it. Start with small things, like thinking about what you're going to do today or what you want to eat. Over time, you'll find that you can have more complex thoughts in English, and that will help you in conversations.
Right. And while we're talking about practice, one of the best ways to practice conversations is by actually having them. If you can, find someone to speak English with. It could be a friend, a family member, or even someone online. The more you practice speaking, the easier it will get.
Yes, practice is key, and don't be afraid to make mistakes while you're practicing. Each conversation is an opportunity to learn something new. It could be a new word, a new phrase, or even just getting more comfortable with speaking.
So, to sum up this first part, listen carefully, ask questions, use simple sentences, and practice as much as you can. These are the building blocks for mastering English conversations. We'll be sharing more tips soon, but for now, focus on these basics and remember, practice makes perfect.
That's right. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become. So, start listening, start speaking, and don't worry about mistakes. You're on the right track. Now that we've covered the basics, let's go a bit deeper into making your English conversations more natural. One thing that helps a lot is giving more detailed answers. For example, when someone asks you, "Did you have a good weekend?" instead of just saying yes, you could add more. You could say something like, "Yes, I went to the park with my friends." Adding detail keeps the conversation interesting.
Right, a short answer can sometimes stop a conversation, but a longer one invites the other person to keep talking. You don't need to say a lot, just a bit more than one word. Like James said, if you add a little detail, you make it easier for the other person to ask more questions or share something similar.
Yes, and don't feel like you always need to give a perfect answer. Conversations are flexible. If you're not sure what to say, you can also ask a question in return. For example, after saying you went to the park, you can ask, "How about you? What did you do this weekend?" That way, the conversation continues and it doesn't feel like too much pressure is on you.
Exactly. Questions are really important in conversations. They show that you're interested in the other person, and they keep the talk going. There are two types of questions you can ask: closed questions and open questions. Closed questions are ones where the answer is usually just yes or no, like did you go to the store? Open questions, on the other hand, require more information, like what did you do today?
And those open questions are the ones that lead to better conversations. They help the other person talk more and share their thoughts. For example, instead of asking, "Did you like the movie?" you could ask, "What did you think of the movie?" This lets the other person give a longer answer, and you'll probably get a more interesting response.
Yes, and it's okay to mix both types of questions. Sometimes a simple yes or no question is fine, but adding open questions helps create deeper conversations. If you feel nervous about keeping the conversation going, just have a few simple questions ready in your mind. You don't need to memorize them exactly, but think about questions like, what do you like to do in your free time? Or what's your favorite kind of food?
That's a great strategy. Having a few questions in your mind can really help when you're unsure what to say next. And speaking of being unsure, don't worry if you pause or hesitate during a conversation. It's completely normal. Even native speakers stop to think sometimes. If you need a second to gather your thoughts, you can say things like, "Let me think for a moment," or "That's a good question. I need to think about it."
That's a good point. Pausing is natural, and it can even show that you're thinking carefully about what to say. You don't need to rush. Conversations are not about speed. They're about connection. Taking a moment to think shows that you care about giving a thoughtful answer.
Absolutely. And here's another tip that can help you connect with others in conversation. Use phrases to show that you're listening. Things like "I see," "that makes sense," or "really" show that you're paying attention. These are called conversation fillers, and they're useful because they keep the conversation smooth, even when you're not sure what to say next.
Yes, fillers like that are great for showing interest. And if you're agreeing with someone, you can also use simple words like "exactly," "you're right," or "I agree." These small phrases show that you understand and that you're engaged in the conversation.
Another great idea is to share your own experiences when possible. If someone talks about something familiar to you, share a similar story. For example, if they say they went to the park, you could say, "Oh, I love going to the park too. Last week, I went with my family and we had a picnic." This way, the conversation becomes more personal and friendly.
Right, James? Sharing your own experiences helps build a connection. Conversations are not just about words. They're about connecting with people. And the more you share, the more comfortable the other person will feel. They might even share something similar in return, and that makes the conversation flow naturally.
Yes, it creates a balance. Both people are talking and listening. Speaking of balance, another thing to remember is to not dominate the conversation. It's important to give the other person a chance to talk to. If you feel like you've been talking for a long time, you can simply ask, "What do you think?" or "What about you?"
Yes, that's a great way to make sure the conversation feels equal. Nobody likes a conversation where one person talks the whole time. By asking for the other person's thoughts, you keep things balanced and respectful.
Exactly. And sometimes conversations can take unexpected turns. Don't be afraid to go with the flow. If the person changes the topic, that's okay. Conversations are flexible and they can go in different directions. It's all part of having a natural, real conversation.
That's true. And changing topics can actually be a good thing. It keeps the conversation fresh. You don't have to stay on one topic for too long. If you want to change the topic, you can use phrases like "by the way" or "speaking of." This helps the conversation move smoothly to something new.
Great tip. So, to recap what we've discussed so far, give more detailed answers, ask open questions, use conversation fillers, share your experiences, and go with the flow. These are all great ways to keep a conversation going and make it more interesting.
Yes, and remember, conversations are about connecting with people. It's okay to make mistakes or pause to think. The more you practice, the better you'll get. Don't be afraid to speak up and try new things in your conversations. Let's move on to something that a lot of people find difficult: talking to strangers in English. It can be really scary to start a conversation with someone you don't know, especially if you're not sure about your language skills. But don't worry, we're here to give you some tips to make it easier.
Yes, starting a conversation with a stranger can be tough, but it's also one of the best ways to improve your English. The more you talk to different people, the more confident you'll become. The first step is just getting the conversation started. A great way to do this is by talking about something around you, like the weather, something happening nearby, or something you both have in common.
That's a good point. For example, if you're at a coffee shop, you can start by saying something simple like, "The coffee smells really good today," or "It's so busy in here, isn't it?" These are easy conversation starters because they're about the place you're both in at that moment. The person can easily reply, and from there, you can build the conversation.
Exactly. Starting with something neutral like the weather or the environment is a great way to break the ice. Another good tip is to give a compliment. People love hearing positive things. You can say something like, "I really like your jacket," or "That's a great bag." It's a simple way to start a conversation and make the other person feel good.
Compliments are always a nice way to connect with someone. But once you've started the conversation, what do you say next? Well, here's where it helps to be prepared. One thing you can do is think of some easy follow-up questions. For example, if you compliment someone's jacket, you could ask, "Where did you get it?" Or if you talk about the weather, you could ask, "Do you like cold weather?"
Yes, having a few follow-up questions ready can really help. And remember, once the conversation gets going, try to stay relaxed. Sometimes we feel nervous because we think we have to speak perfectly, but conversations don't need to be perfect. They just need to be real. It's okay if you make a mistake or forget a word. The important thing is that you keep trying.
Definitely, it's normal to feel nervous at first, but with practice, it gets easier. Another thing to remember is to show interest in what the other person is saying. People love to talk about themselves, so if you ask them about their hobbies, job, or interests, they will likely talk more. This gives you a chance to listen and respond, keeping the conversation going.
Right. For example, if you ask someone, "What do you do for work?" and they say, "I'm a teacher," you can follow up by asking, "Oh, what grade do you teach? Or do you enjoy teaching?" These kinds of follow-up questions make the other person feel like you're really listening and interested in what they have to say.
That's a great example. Follow-up questions are key to deepening a conversation. And don't forget, it's okay to share a little bit about yourself too. If someone says they're a teacher, you can say, "That's cool. I've always thought teaching would be a fun job." This keeps the conversation balanced and helps build a connection.
Yes, sharing your thoughts is important. It makes the conversation feel more natural and less like an interview. You don't want to just ask questions. You also want to add your own thoughts and experiences. If you keep asking questions without sharing anything, the conversation might feel a little one-sided.
Exactly. A good conversation is like a dance you take turns. They talk, then you talk. They ask questions, then you ask questions. It's a back-and-forth exchange, and like we said before, don't be afraid to pause or take a moment to think. It's better to think about what you want to say than to rush and feel more nervous.
Speaking of pausing, another useful tip is learning how to buy yourself time if you're not sure what to say next. You can use phrases like, "Let me think about that," or "That's an interesting question." This gives you a little bit of time to plan your answer without feeling rushed.
Yes, buying time is such a helpful skill, especially in conversations where you need to think quickly. And if you're ever stuck or don't understand what the other person said, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat themselves. You can simply say, "Sorry, can you say that again?" Or "I didn't catch that. What did you mean?"
That's really important. If you don't understand something, it's always better to ask for clarification. People won't mind repeating themselves, and it's much better than pretending you understood and getting confused later. And if someone asks you a question that you don't know how to answer, you can be honest. You can say, "I'm not sure," or "I don't know much about that." It's okay to not have all the answers.
Definitely, honesty is always a good approach in conversations. It shows that you're genuine and open. Another thing I want to mention is using phrases that make conversations flow smoothly. These are called transition phrases. They help you change topics or move the conversation forward. For example, if you've been talking about someone's job, but you want to talk about their hobbies, you could say, "Speaking of free time, what do you like to do for fun?"
Transition phrases are really useful. They make the conversation feel natural, and they help you move from one topic to another without feeling awkward. You can also use phrases like, "by the way," or "that reminds me," to introduce a new topic. These little phrases are great for keeping the conversation flowing.
Yes, and when you're ready to end the conversation, you can use polite phrases to signal that it's time to wrap things up. For example, you can say, "It was really nice talking to you," or "I hope we can chat again soon." This way, you leave the conversation on a positive note, and the other person feels good about it.
Ending a conversation politely is just as important as starting it. You want the other person to feel like they had a good conversation with you. And who knows, they might want to talk to you again in the future.
Exactly. So, to sum up, start conversations with simple topics, use follow-up questions, share your own experiences, and don't worry about making mistakes. The more you practice, the easier it will get. And remember, conversations are about connecting with people. So relax, enjoy the process, and keep practicing.
We've talked a lot about different ways to have a good conversation in English, and I think we should focus on one final thing that is very important: building your confidence when speaking. Because honestly, even if you know all the right tips, it can still feel difficult to actually use them if you don't feel confident.
Absolutely, confidence is key, but I know, for many learners, speaking in English can be scary. You might worry about making mistakes or about not being understood. That's completely normal. Even native speakers make mistakes all the time. But the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Yes, and here's a tip to build confidence. Start small. You don't have to jump into long conversations with strangers right away. You can start with little steps, like practicing with a friend or family member, or even speaking to yourself at home. Try reading a book out loud, talking about your day in English, or even practicing with a language learning app.
That's a great idea. Speaking to yourself is actually really helpful. It's a low-pressure way to get used to hearing yourself speak English. You can stand in front of a mirror and practice conversations, or just talk about things you see around you. The key is to make English a part of your daily routine.
Right, the more you use English in everyday life, the more natural it will feel. Another way to build confidence is by setting small, realistic goals. For example, you can set a goal to start one conversation in English each day. It could be as simple as asking someone how their day is going, or ordering coffee in English if you're in a place where English is spoken. These small wins will help build your confidence over time.
Yes, small goals are so important because they make the whole process less overwhelming. If you think, "I have to be perfect at English," that's too much pressure. But if you think, "I'll just try to have one small conversation today," that feels more manageable. And each time you reach that goal, you'll feel more confident to try again.
And speaking of confidence, remember that mistakes are part of learning. You don't need to be afraid of making them. In fact, making mistakes is how you learn. When you realize you made a mistake, you can correct it and remember it for the future. So don't feel embarrassed if you say something wrong. It's all part of the process.
That's such an important point. Mistakes are not something to fear, they're opportunities to improve. And people are usually very understanding, especially if they know you're learning. If you're not sure about a word, or if you say something that doesn't sound right, it's okay to laugh and say, "Oops, I meant this." This shows that you're learning and trying, and that's always a positive thing.
Exactly. And another great way to build confidence is to listen to English as much as you can. This helps you get used to the sounds and rhythms of the language. You can watch movies, listen to music, or even follow English podcasts. When you hear more English, you'll start to notice how native speakers talk and the kinds of phrases they use.
Yes, and the more you listen, the easier it becomes to recognize common phrases and words. Listening also helps with pronunciation. You'll start to hear how words are really pronounced, and you can practice copying those sounds. And don't forget, you don't need to understand everything. It's okay if you don't catch every word. Just focus on getting the general idea.
That's right. Another thing that helps is joining an English speaking group or community. If you have friends or classmates who are also learning English, practice with them. You can even join online groups where people practice English together. The more you surround yourself with English speakers, the more comfortable you'll feel using the language.
That's such a great idea. Being part of a group where you can practice English is really helpful. It's a safe space where you can make mistakes and learn together. Plus, it's motivating when you see other people improving along with you. You can share tips, encourage each other, and make learning more fun.
Definitely. Learning with others keeps you motivated, and you'll also realize that everyone faces challenges when learning a language. You're not alone in this, and sometimes it's just nice to have someone to talk to who understands what it's like to be in your shoes.
Exactly. And if you don't have a group of people to practice with, don't worry. You can still practice on your own or even with a language exchange partner. There are lots of apps where you can find someone who is learning your language, and you can help each other. For example, you could help someone with your native language, and they can help you with English.
Language exchanges are a great idea. They give you the chance to speak with someone who is also learning, so you're both helping each other. Plus, you can learn about each other's cultures, which is a fun way to make the conversation more interesting.
That's true. And one more thing that can really help build confidence is celebrating your progress. Sometimes we focus so much on what we still need to learn that we forget how far we've come. Take time to recognize your achievements. Maybe you can now have a conversation in English that you couldn't have a month ago. Or maybe you can understand a TV show without subtitles. These are big wins.
Absolutely! Celebrating your progress is a great way to stay motivated. Learning a language is a journey, and every step forward is something to be proud of. If you feel stuck or frustrated, just remind yourself of how much you've already learned.
And remember, confidence comes with time. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become. It's okay to feel nervous at first, that's part of learning. But with practice, those nerves will fade and you'll start to feel more comfortable speaking English.
Exactly. So, to wrap up, here's what we've talked about today: building confidence, setting small goals, practicing with friends or language partners, listening to English as much as possible, and celebrating your progress. These are all ways to help you become more confident in your English conversations.
Yes, and the most important thing to remember is to enjoy the process. Learning a new language is a wonderful thing, and it opens up so many opportunities. So keep practicing, stay positive, and most of all, have fun with it.
Well, that's all for today. We hope you found these tips helpful. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English learning content. And feel free to share this podcast with your friends and family who are also learning English.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. We're really glad you joined us today. Keep practicing your English, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, and happy learning.